Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. Welcome to the Momentum Flow, where ideas, innovations, and experiences create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain operator turned investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and keep the momentum flow going. Today, we're joined by Laura Julian, Managing Director and Senior Partner at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, and the leader of their North America operations practice. With 2 decades advising Fortune 500 industrials and global OEMs across automotive, aerospace and defense, agriculture, and more, Laura helps organizations unlock the full potential of their operations, procurement excellence, supply chain innovation, complexity reduction, digital execution, and organization-wide transformations. Laura, it's really an honor for me to have you here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Luis. Glad to be here.
So Laura, I know you, but some people in my audience really don't know you. So I will ask you first, if you don't mind, you can start with a brief introduction of yourself, your role at BCG, and a little summary of your vast 20-year journey in operating consulting. So.
Absolutely. It's great to talk with you today. I have had the pleasure of serving many clients over a couple of decades in consulting. When I started, I didn't know what my focus was going to be or where I wanted to end up spending my time. But I was one of those kids who grew up taking things apart, putting them back together, watching different shows on TV that were just lollipops going down a conveyor belt in a manufacturing plant. So once I got into my junior ranks of consulting and had the opportunity to actually see hands-on how products get made, how services get delivered, it really opened up my eyes to all of the possibility and efficiency and global connection. And so that's why I've spent so long doing it. You mentioned I have the pleasure of leading our operations practice in North America, and we define operations, everything from research and development through procurement, sourcing, planning, everything within the 4 walls of manufacturing for manufacturing businesses, and then aftermarket sales and service. So I get to touch lots of different industries and every part of that chain.
Excellent. So for my audience, Laura is as end-to-end as it can be as an operator. So now you've led transformations across procurement, network design, supply chain, and digital operations. What is the common thread in all those transformations that you see driving success across industries? Let's start first across industries. Which are the commonalities?
Yeah, certainly one, first and foremost, is just leadership conviction and vision of what a supply chain and operations organization and company can look like. The times that I support transformations that are most successful, it's when the CEO or the leadership team or the COO truly believe that they can deliver faster, better, higher quality in a more innovative way. And that takes many different lenses to it. The specifics by industry change, and as you can imagine, have nuance to them. But that drive from leadership really causes the inspiration within the organization. And I'd say number 2 is then inspiring the organization, because when it comes down to it, no matter how much automation is in the manufacturing, no matter how much everything ties to innovation, even in businesses like software where there isn't anything physically being produced, it's people at the heart of it, and any transformation comes with change. And so the ability to motivate the organization, bring them along, and then also, and I think this is really important in today's day of digitization and move towards AI, utilizing the knowledge and the thoughts and capabilities of the entry level and the frontline resources. I think so often leaders in transformations think that we know it all, but the right way to deliver for the customer is often known by the person talking to the customer every single day. The right way to produce a product or move more efficiently is often the machine operator who's touching it every single day. And so both motivating and bringing the organization along, but then also utilizing the knowledge and tapping into it.
Excellent. You maybe reflect on times that we've interacted, and obviously, that interaction has been fantastic. But you're telling me that consultant doesn't know it all? Come on, I'm just kidding. So my background is a little is operator heavy, as you know, operator centric, running complex supply chains, leading transformations, being inside the shop floors and supply ecosystems. Your lens and the consultant's lenses are always more strategic, advising working groups across many OEMs and tier supply chains, right? So, which are the biggest difference that you see on how operators and advisors diagnose and solve operating problems?
Yep. And the differences, I think, are why these two groups of people and minds work so well together and why the best transformations bring them together. But operators come from history in the most part, what has worked, what hasn't worked in the past, the depth and the knowledge of what is most relevant to that environment, whether it be a plant or a distribution center or a specific supply chain. And advisors, to spin it in a positive light, aren't burdened by that history. We come with the ability to say what could be possible, to ask the questions, to understand why something wasn't done in the past. And it's amazing every single time we do this, we find an area that has been thought of or has been considered, but never in the way that we're able to bring or with the industry analog from somewhere nearby, but not exactly the same, that opens up the mind. Now, advisors would be if you were to snap your fingers and you and I change roles tomorrow, we would both fail because I
Mhm.
don't have that deep day-to-day expertise to run it immediately, and you don't have that cross-industry knowledge and experience the way that I do. And so it's important to listen to each other, to trust each other's ideas, to work through the questions and the problems, and use that difference as a benefit. I think the other element of it as well is that the people, again, operators often are leaders from line managers all the way up through executives. And as an operator, you have to be keeping the best interest of specific individual people and teams in mind, both internally as well as customers and suppliers. As an advisor, we take a more overarching holistic view of what groups of people can benefit from one move or another. How do we ensure to keep that in mind? And again, those are differences that come together to allow us to call out each other on potential blind spots, find opportunities that perhaps we weren't thinking about before. I'll give you one example. Just earlier today, I was on a call with the president of one of the business units for one of my clients, and he was lamenting to me that a large portion of what he manufactures and sells is actually sold internally to another business unit. And so transfer pricing can cause strange incentives because it's basically a cost plus model. And if they reduce their costs, they're going to reduce their revenue. Well, I've done a lot of my work in aerospace and in defense environments where cost plus is a very well established contract type that we have to work within. And there is attrition of benefit in that circumstance. The specifics are very different, but a lot of the ideas that I was throwing out to him for how to motivate the organization, set up incentives in a way that works around this, how to ensure that the right efficiencies are incentivized versus not, come from that experience in a completely different space. And so that conversation, I think, brought together unlocks for both of us bringing those different viewpoints.
That's an interesting point, and maybe you can help me and the audience. Maybe we can see it from both sides. You know, there's misconceptions how OEMs or executives often have about suppliers, and likewise the reverse, right? About how the decision making is done by the OEMs when you're a supplier. How does an advisor facilitate that bridging the gap of understanding in both sides?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's so true. And there's often so much that can be learned from an improved relationship between supplier and customer. The role that we try to play is helping whichever side that we are contracted with. So we don't get involved directly in negotiations, but oftentimes much of our work will touch one of those relationships. So when we can talk to both sides, or if we're only talking to one side, helping to understand the context of the supplier or the customer, which is often something that maybe an executive or a category director might have. But when you get down to the category manager buyer level, oftentimes that context, they don't take the time to step back and say, what is happening in the broader resin market to drive my supplier to be making these decisions, to actually deprioritize my business over another customer. And so we try to help provide that insight, both at a market level, also at a company level, as well as at an individual level. And I think that's one thing that both sides we often have a lot of conversation about is yes, while you are negotiating or in a relationship with a company, the individual people are people, they're human beings. And so their goals for promotion or their overall business goals that they're trying to make margin numbers or increase EBITDA or whatever it might be is something that they as an individual are really tied to. And so, how does your conversation or relationship or request impact what they're trying to get at? And so, a lot of what we do is just bring that information that on face value might not seem all that relevant to an individual buyer conversation with a supplier. But when you get down to it, it indicates why they are holding supply back or why there's an issue with lead time or whatever it might be. And so that's sort of a bridge we try to create in those relationships.
Do you think those roles will evolve over the next decade? I'm thinking, you can think from the OEMs or supplier or strategic partnerships, but in industries that are facing massive transformation or transition, electrification, EVs, defense modernization, climate-driven redesigns, do you think those roles would evolve over the next decade or not? Or
I think for sure. I mean, there are several different factors at play. First of all, to your point, in industries where the actual supplier base is changing, there's going to have to be a different level of participation and innovation between the two parties, of um, sub-tier supply chain management that's going to have to happen between an ultimate OEM and a supplier. Plus, there's just going to be macro trends overall. I mean, the hope, I know, Luis, you and I hope very much that that planning and integrated business planning is going to improve with all of the current tools and AI that is out there. Hopefully, that will increase the transparency, the predictability. So much of the pain point and the tension in those relationships come from lack of knowledge of what orders are coming and what to expect and when supply will be available. In theory, all of the data that's out there, all of the computing power that we have should provide some relief and therefore also impact how those relationships and roles evolve.
you brought me back to memory lane, and for my audience, Laura and I, full transparency, we have crossed paths 2 or 3 times, always around, or mainly around integrated business planning in different angles. So you brought back definitely some memory. So let's pivot to a little bit more. The macro forces globally that are shaping the operations today, right? So, and BCG has always been at the forefront of thinking about supply chains shifting from cost centers to strategic value creators. Uh, which macro forces, it could be geopolitical, sustainability, AI, labor, are most fundamentally shaping operating models right now from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, all of them are having an impact for sure. I think that looking at AI, which is something we've all talked about a lot, I actually see two different frontiers of impact. Number one is what we were just talking about. How do you take the computing power and tools that exist and actually change the systems for how supply chains connect, understand each other, predict, etc. I think that's a bit of a mid to long term movement. There are some companies that are on the forefront of it, but it's going to take a while to make its way through. I think the other frontier that is very much upon us is how the daily work of the people are changing who are running these supply chains. The way that research is done, the information that they are processing, how competitive bids are run, all of this day-to-day management is evolving quickly. And that is going to have a major impact on the talent available, on how to evaluate that talent, on how you evaluate a supply chain for being successful or not, or underperforming. And I think that very much ties into, you mentioned labor as well. I think there's constraint in supply chain knowledge and labor as one of these massive forces. But I also think there's huge opportunity to make the amount of value added work that entry level and frontline workers do so much higher than it has been in the past. And what that's going to take is utilizing the incoming generation to the workforce and take their knowledge and the way that they do things and applying it to age old business practices that need to change. I mean, I was reflecting with my team. I, 18 years ago, I did a procurement diagnostic with a client, and 3 months ago, I did another one, did many in between. But the one that I did 3 months ago looked very similar to the way we did it 18 years ago. Get a
Wow.
team of people, you collect the data on spreadsheets. Yeah, nowadays there's a little more computing power versus just in Excel. But then you built PowerPoint diagrams and you found the insights and you put it out. Well, today launched another procurement diagnostic that's going to look entirely different. It utilizes tools that will collect the data, it will clean the data, it uses Gen AI to figure out exactly which suppliers spelled differently fall into the same category. Basically, it's just going to speed up the non-value add elements so that when the value add insight requires people, we're able to spend most of the time there. And I think that type of approach and the people that know how to do that is where companies are going to have to focus to take supply chains forward.
So with that, thanks. That's very enlightening. So, but with that faster, uh, getting to getting to an answer faster, being able to process more data more robustly. Do you think that, not do you think, are you seeing companies really, really making major redesigns? Because one would argue that you have time to then don't do transformations in pieces, but just take advantage on doing a deep rooted transformation that some companies really need, whether it's multi-shoring, redundancies, vertical integrations. So, or are you seeing just more incremental adjustments?
It's a mix. I think we're at the point right now where organizations are, well, they're the leading edge that are making big bets and moving in that direction. And I think time is still going to tell what we learn from that, how successful that move is, and where the tweaks need to be made to do it next. I think about, I'm just going to throw a number out there, half, a third of organizations are recognizing that there are certain use cases where they need to make these step changes in how they're interacting and running their business and taking them forward and learning from them. And then there's a lot of lagging companies who are waiting to see or are only going through, as you say, very incremental moves in order to push it forward. I think we're going to see an increasing number of companies who are going for things like planning, procurement, supplier negotiations, the elements of AI that don't require significant capital investment to see the turnaround and the change happen. I think the massive investments in automation are still going to continue to trail behind because there is such a high burden of proof around that business case that is still getting proven out in many industries. In some places, it's already been proven, but in others, it's still happening.
In today's supply chain conversations, it wouldn't be a supply chain conversation within going to AI, right? So let me go a little bit into that area. Which are the most meaningful shifts you're seeing in companies approaching digitization? You mentioned planning, procurement. Is there a specific area or a specific niche, a specific industry that you're seeing higher adoption?
So I'm seeing it in places where there is heavy non-value add labor that is necessary at this point within the supply chain. Those are the first places where I think the outside companies and internal innovation are starting to find ways to reduce that non-value time. And so whether that means ability to reduce total labor count or even better, ability to refocus that labor on high value areas. And so I think businesses that have heavy customer service operations, ones that have heavy procurement, individual buying, a lot of service center and IT spaces. The ones that are harder to replace, obviously, are physical manufacturers, distribution, those types of areas. But then a lot of the insight behind it, the routing optimization, the delivery modes, all of the people that are running that, taking a good hard look at the time they're spending, where is it valuable human-based insight and where can it be replicated? And so I think companies are very naturally starting to find the places where the business cases are clear, and where it's the technology exists at scale to put that into place.
And you're seeing your customers, achieving the target ROI that they did when they went into this?
Yeah, in the places where it's a lower incoming investment, where the value can be proven on small scale and then rolled out more large scale, that's where we're seeing it. I think the biggest pitfall that we are seeing is proving it in small scale and then not taking the steps
Yeah,
necessary to scale it.
yeah.
That's the step that we're at as a organization.
Is a shame, right? Because that's where the real ROI could magnify for companies. But that indirectly, you're saying that companies are not putting more capital expense in their initiatives just because technology is there.
We're not seeing massive shifts. There might be, taking the existing capital budget and taking a portion of it and redefining it. But in most of the industrial industries where I work, it's not a massive change in the capital that's being invested.
Okay. That's a bit that's interesting. Nothing that I don't fall off my chair, at least myself, hearing you speak like that. If you had a magic wand, and could you redesign how companies approach industry 4.0, let's call it, what would you change? You
Yeah,
have all the power.
yeah. I think the biggest element of it is a clean sheet thought experiment of, if I were to define today what the best way is to deliver my product to my customers, how would I build it today? Because so much of the industries that you and I work in are 50, 75, over 100 years old. The history, the ingrained way of doing things runs deep, and you're very locked in investment wise. I mean,
Mm,
so many, especially manufacturing companies, have such heavy asset bases that moving it is nearly impossible. So I would love for companies to go through the thought experiment to say, let's ignore all of that for a minute. How would we best deliver? What would our supply chain look like? What would our global footprint look like? Not in specifics, but in high level vision. How would we create the product? What would our partnerships look like? And then you can say, okay, now what is a reasonable space on that spectrum to shoot for, given that asset intensity is a real thing, and given that we can't just get rid of our entire way of working. But it starts to open up companies' eyes to where are the places where we truly are being inefficient, and today's technology and tools can have a massive change, and where are there places where it's more of just an incremental shift that we could take advantage of when the time is right. But I think there's hesitation because everyone knows it's not realistic to ever achieve that full vision,
yeah.
but that often gives really a direction to work off of.
Let me see if I can get a little bit more from you. Let me go into three sectors that I know you're deep pockets on, which are auto, aerospace and defense, and ag. So let me just do a quick one question on each of them. So in the auto side, you know, this shift to electrification, electric vehicles, and software defined vehicles is forcing an overhaul of the supply base. I lived it personally. You've seen it in your customer base. How are you seeing procurement manufacturing strategies evolve because of that change of supplier base?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think we're coming out of a period of the new equipment and the ability to manufacture these technologies, having to learn what the supply base should look like, having to change, the way that you qualify a new supplier on a brake system is very different from the internal software system of a vehicle, and having to change those processes in the supply base. I think where we're at right now that honestly is causing a lot of pain and a lot of work necessary is in the aftermarket and the repair
Mm.
cycle and the tail. We haven't figured it all out in original equipment by any means, but we really haven't figured out what is the service cycle on all of the parts of an EV vehicle. What is the availability that should be out there for battery replacement? How do tires wear, and what does that mean for service centers? What is the service center of the future, and how many lifts are necessary to get a vehicle up versus what can be done on the ground? And then also, what is a customer expectation for what the life of a vehicle is, and what does that mean for their willingness to invest in overhauls at major stages? I mean, we have 100 years of knowledge of that in ICE vehicles that we can somewhat readily predict how customers are going to react, plus or minus some economic sentiment. I don't think we know any of that for EV at
Okay.
this point. And so
So
there's a huge area to
So,
learn.
so aftermarket for auto space, which is very interesting and I know super complex. So now aerospace and defense, you know, a lot of production ramping up, capacity, quality, resilience trying to be built. Uh, which are the bigger bottlenecks that you see in your customer base between the leaders and the laggards?
So, aerospace, working across these industries is so interesting because you look at something like automotive new car sales and you say, well, there's so much that's the whim of an individual consumer. And so you do your best to predict. And then you look at something like commercial aerospace and you say, well, there are for decades out expectations for what capacity will be needed, what the actual order book looks like for major airlines to the OEMs. And so you would think you can then trace back exactly when a certain, suspension supplier is going to need to provide what volume into the supply chain. But it doesn't work that way because of so many other ups and downs, because of how integrated the supply chain is with other industries. So many of the suppliers, especially in lower tiers, don't only serve commercial aerospace, but they serve defense applications and automotive and trucking and oil and gas and all of these different places that have their varying supply chain needs. And so I think the leaders in this space tend to fall, first of all, in a tier of the supply chain where they are resilient to those ups and downs. So they are serving at least a couple of industries and can shift some of their production capacity one space or another as and if needed. They're also ones who are keeping up strong relationship with the integrators and the OEMs. So they are understanding what the sentiment is, how some of the forecasts are changing, not just from what's put out publicly, but from the sentiment that they are hearing. And then I think there's a huge element of this that is reaction to major events. I mean, we just went through over the last few years a series of major events in the industry. One of them is, a new engine was released that had a very different performance and overhaul cycle than what was planned or what was expected upon the release. And so the parts of the supply chain that have been able to adjust quickly are the ones that have been able to lead the pull out of that downturn. And others have been very hit by it because they didn't have that resilience built in, either the ability, as I said, to shift capacity industry to industry, or to ramp up quickly, or to utilize partnerships in order to deliver what's necessary. All of that falls under that category.
Mm, perfect. So very clear, very clear. On the, I was going to ask you on ag, but in the interest of time, unless you have anything you want to highlight on the ag sector, um,
No, I'll just say the ag sector is an interesting one because it's a space where they have really realized that the amount of data they're able to pull off of the equipment can be monetized and valuable to multiple different stakeholders. And I think that that is really a key learning for other industries is to stop and say, what data do I have access to or have ownership rights to, and who might be able to get value out of the insight that comes out of it beyond just my tight little ecosystem of customers that I work with.
Excellent. So we're converging towards the end of our conversation, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk a little bit about leadership, talent, and transformation with you, right? Especially leadership and talent. So from your perspective, what separates leaders who drive durable change from those that really get stuck, that is just a little change and just incrementality? What are those skills that you've seen in your transformation endeavors that leaders, hey, this leader brought this, and because of that, this was being able to be executed according to the real plan?
Yeah, I think there's two that come immediately to mind. I'm sure there's 30 other ones, but the two that really pop to mind, number one is the ability to prioritize and deprioritize for an organization. So often it is easy to say, these are the 10 things we need to do to be successful. But then, how are you going to deliver those when you still have the other thousand on your plate that have always been there and aren't going away? And so the leaders that can make the really hard choices and say, this is the direction we're going in, this is what we need to do, and these are the five things that we're going to stop or put on hold while we get ourselves organized around the transformation, those are the ones that are really able to make the change stick because the focus is there. So that's number one. Number two is leaders who ruthlessly focus on developing and changing the individual versus the initiative. I think so many times we enter into transformations and they're always hard. It's extra work. It's a challenge. You're signing up for a massive change that you don't know how you're going to deliver. And the leaders that focus on empowering, enabling, changing the behaviors and the capabilities of those underneath them that are going to deliver it are the ones that, no matter how the initiatives need to change or how much they deliver, are creating a management layer that can take on whatever is thrown at them. When leaders focus only on the initiatives and the milestones, we often see the leaders of those initiatives change over. We see their focus waver because they don't feel like it's them individually who are growing or changing, and they don't feel empowered to potentially even change the mandate if they see something else that is more valuable at hand. And so those are the two that I would mention that are top of mind for me today.
So you went on that rabbit hole. So which is you can only pick one leadership behavior that consistently moves the needle across. You only have one. You can only have one pick. Which one you pick?
Of those two,
Hmm.
I think I got to go with the first one. I mean, you have to stop doing things to start doing others. And it's often pet projects that have to be the ones to stop. It's tough choices. But without that, can't progress.
I, I live it in firsthand. So yeah, it's always very difficult. It's very easy to add. It's very difficult to stop doing things.
Hmm.
So maybe just getting to a couple closing reflections. So uh, for the audience, remember most of the audience of this podcast is people that are operators, supply chain leaders. Uh, which is the most exciting opportunity from your perspective for the next 5, 10 years ahead?
I mean, I'll tell you what I am really excited about is the generational change in the workforce and how we're going to be able to shift supply chains as a result of it. It comes from the way that Gen Z utilizes technology and Gen AI, from how they see the role of a company and an employer and what they want to give to it. And I think that there is just a huge groundswell that is there to take advantage of as we transform the way that we operate and run our supply chains, teach this new batch of employees how to work in our business, but also be quiet and learn and adjust and evolve the way that we run it because they're onto something and we're only going to be made better if we let them help shape it.
Last question, Laura. So, yeah, then I'm trying to end every conversation with this question. This is the momentum flow, right? So, from your perspective, what really creates momentum in an operations transformation? What drives that momentum acceleration?
Yeah, it is excitement, proving the value, and then small wins. Getting the small wins, celebrating the small wins that start to build and build and build. And that's what true momentum is. And it is fulfilling for everybody involved when those small wins start to get amassed.
All right. It's I knew it was going to be a great conversation, but I got more than what I bargained for. Not that I didn't expect it, but thanks for your time and really sharing your expertise and bringing such clarity to the challenges. You have that view and that multi-industry view and years of experience that helps compare and contrast and bring best cases and perspective to a lot of operating challenges. Thanks for that. Um, so, to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Momentum Flow, where we explore the ideas, innovations, and leadership moves that keep the momentum going in modern supply chains. Our mission here is simple: to connect ideas, people, and technologies that are shaping the next generation of resilient, intelligent, and high performance supply chains. Momentum doesn't happen by accident. It's built through continuous learning, bold thinking, and leaders willing to push industries forward. If you enjoyed this episode with Laura, please follow the series, share it, and keep the conversation flowing. And as always, keep the momentum flow going. Thanks for listening.